Alright, so Grand Theft Auto 6. Honestly, it's hard to think of anything in the whole history of entertainment that people have collectively lost their minds over quite the way they have with this one game. A game that, as I'm sitting here recording this, still is not quite out yet, though after years of shifting promises, it has finally landed on a firm date late this coming November. And its pre-orders have at last gone live around the world, so that the end of this impossibly long wait is genuinely, actually in sight now. It has already been hacked and leaked, delayed and delayed again, priced and pre-ordered, sued over, argued over, and somehow twisted into a full-blown culture war, all of it before a single person outside of Rockstar has actually gotten to play the thing. And that, strangely, is exactly what makes it such perfect company for a night like tonight, because you can just lie back and let the whole ridiculous, fascinating saga wash over you without one single piece of it actually mattering to your life at all. So get comfortable, pull the blanket up, turn the lights down low, and if this kind of slow, quiet wander through gaming's biggest circus is the sort of thing that helps you drift off, feel free to leave a gentle like and maybe tell me down in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight, and then just let all of it go. And let me walk you softly through every controversy and every wild theory surrounding the most anticipated game ever made. One calm little piece at a time. Let's start where the modern madness really began, with the leak, because it is genuinely one of the strangest stories in the history of the games industry, and it set the tone for everything that came after. Back in the autumn of 2022, more than a year before Rockstar had officially confirmed the game even existed, someone got inside. A member of a loose hacking group broke into Rockstar's internal systems and made off with an enormous trove of early development footage, and then, rather than quietly selling it or holding it for ransom, simply dumped it out onto the internet for the whole world to see. 90 separate clips of a game that was years from release, raw and unfinished, spilled out all at once, and the gaming world absolutely lost its collective mind. What people saw in that footage was not a polished trailer, but the raw guts of a game still deep in the middle of being built. Characters walking through test environments, placeholder textures, debugging tools visible on the screen, the kind of unfinished, unglamorous work that no studio ever wants the public to see. And because it was so raw, so clearly a work in progress, a strange and unfair thing happened. Some people looked at this half-built game and declared it ugly, unimpressive, a disappointment, as though they were judging a finished film by watching a few minutes of unlit footage with the boom mics still in frame. It was a deeply unfair way to see a game for the first time, stripped of all the polish and presentation that years of work would eventually bring, and it put Rockstar in the miserable position of having their unfinished work paraded and mocked before it was ready. The person behind it turned out to be a teenager, and here the story takes a turn that is almost hard to believe. The young man responsible was a member of an international hacking crew that had already caused chaos at some of the biggest technology companies in the world, and he was, at the time of the Rockstar break-in, already out on bail, already being watched, already supposedly cut off from the tools of his trade. His laptop had been confiscated, and yet he carried out one of the most infamous hacks in gaming history anyway, reportedly using nothing more than the television in a hotel room, a streaming stick of the kind you might use to watch films, and his own phone. It is an almost absurd image, one of the most valuable secrets in entertainment prized loose by a teenager with a hotel telly and a cheap streaming dongle. And it says something about both his strange brilliance and the sheer vulnerability of even the most guarded companies. His story did not end happily, and it is worth pausing on gently, because underneath the sensational headlines it is genuinely sad. The young man was found to be severely autistic, and was assessed by doctors as not fit to stand trial in the ordinary way, and in the end a judge ruled that he should be held in a secure hospital, kept there indefinitely until medical professionals judged that he no longer posed a risk. It was not a prison sentence in the usual sense, but something stranger and more open-ended, a young life placed under lock and care for as long as the doctors deemed necessary. Whatever you make of what he did, it was a genuine and serious crime that caused real harm. There is a heaviness to the way it all ended, a troubled young person swept up in something far larger than himself, and it hangs over the whole strange saga of the leak like a shadow. The fallout for Rockstar was real and immediate, a nightmare of exactly the kind every big studio dreads, and it forced the company to respond publicly, to confirm that the leak was genuine, to express its disappointment and its determination that the incident would not derail the game or change its plans. There was a strange dignity in that response, a refusal to panic, an insistence that the work would go on, but beneath it you could feel the wound of it, the violation of having years of careful private labour torn open and displayed to a world all too ready to judge it harshly. It is one thing to show your work when it is ready. It is another to have it stolen and paraded while it is still raw. The whole episode became a strange lesson in how the modern internet treats unfinished things, in the unfairness of judging any work in progress by the standards of a finished product, and thoughtful voices tried, in the aftermath, to remind everyone that what they had seen was never meant to be seen. That every game and film and building looks rough and ugly halfway through its making, that the magic of the final product is precisely what all those years of unglamorous work are for. Many developers from other studios spoke up in solidarity, sharing their own early, unfinished footage to show how far a game travels between its rough middle and its polished end, a quiet act of collective defence of the hidden, messy process of creation. There was, buried in the wrongness of it, a strange and guilty fascination for some, for the stolen footage offered a rare glimpse behind the curtain of how these enormous worlds are actually built. The scaffolding and the placeholder art and the debugging tools, the unglamorous machinery that every finished game hides so carefully. To those who loved the craft of these things, there was something quietly captivating in seeing a great world in its half-made state, in glimpsing the bones beneath the skin, even as they knew the footage was never meant for their eyes, and that its release had done real harm to the people who made it. It was an uneasy fascination, tangled up always with the knowledge of the theft that had produced it, and most thoughtful fans held it at arm's length, unwilling to celebrate something that had caused such distress, and yet unable entirely to look away from so rare a window into the hidden labour of creation. For the wider world, though, the leak did something perhaps more lasting, which was to confirm, absolutely and beyond any doubt, that the game was real and coming, after years in which it had been little more than a rumour. Whatever else it did, the leak lifted the veil, turned the game from a whispered maybe into an undeniable fact, and in a strange way it may have intensified the anticipation even as it embarrassed the company, for now everyone knew, for certain, that the thing they had been dreaming of was actually being built, somewhere, right now. The genie was out of the bottle, and there would be no putting it back. That leak, for all the chaos it caused, was really just the opening act, the first sign that this game was going to be surrounded by drama unlike anything the industry had seen, because what came next, when Rockstar finally decided to show the world the game on their own terms, would break records that had nothing to do with gaming at all. So let us leave the leak behind and move gently forward to the moment the company itself finally pulled back the curtain, in a trailer that the entire world seemed to stop and watch at once. The first proper trailer arrived at the very end of 2023, and even the way it was released turned into a small drama of its own. Rockstar had planned to unveil it on a particular morning, building the anticipation carefully, but the trailer leaked online a little early, slipping out ahead of schedule, and rather than let the pirated version dominate, the company simply shrugged and released the real thing hours early, in the middle of the night, to get ahead of the leak. It was a fitting little echo of everything that had come before, a game so hungrily awaited that it could not even be revealed on its own terms, the world snatching at it before its makers were quite ready to hand it over. And when that trailer landed, the numbers it put up were genuinely staggering, the kind of figures that belong less to a video game and more to a global cultural event. Within a single day it had been watched tens of millions of times, and within a few days it had climbed past 100 million views, becoming the most watched non-musical video ever posted to that platform in its first day, outpacing trailers for the biggest films in the world, outpacing very nearly everything. People did not just watch it once, they watched it over and over, slowing it down, pausing it frame by frame, dissecting every second of it for clues, and the whole internet, for a little while, seemed to be talking about nothing else at all. What that trailer showed was a return to the sun-soaked world of Vice City, the game's gaudy, neon parody of Florida and the city of Miami, brought forward from the 1980 setting of the beloved older game into a bright and lurid vision of the modern day. It was full of alligators wandering into swimming pools and influencers filming themselves, and the strange sweaty, chaotic energy that the real Florida is famous for, and it was set to an old and wistful song that gave the whole thing an unexpected ache of melancholy beneath the mayhem. And at the centre of it, for the first time in the whole long history of the series, stood a woman. That woman was named Lucia, and her presence at the heart of the trailer was itself a small landmark. For in all the decades of the series there had never before been a female lead you could play as in the main story. The trailer introduced her in a prison jumpsuit, being processed through the system, and hinted at a partner, a man named Jason. The two of them bound together as a criminal couple on the run, a pairing the world immediately recognised as an echo of the old outlaw legend of two lovers robbing their way across the country until it all came crashing down. It was a bold and romantic and slightly doomed premise, and it gave people endless material to dream and argue about. A long time later, after much waiting, a second trailer arrived and deepened the picture, giving a fuller look at the two lovers and their sun-drenched, dangerous world, at the modern Vice City and the wider state around it, at the Bonnie and Clyde romance at the story's heart. It too broke records, watched hundreds of millions of times, and it too was picked apart frame by frame by a fan base that had turned the analysis of these trailers into something like a full-time hobby. Between the two of them, those trailers gave the world just enough to feed years of speculation and almost nothing that could actually be confirmed, which is, in its way, exactly how Rockstar has always liked it, revealing little, promising less, and letting the hunger build. There was, woven through that first look, a single sad and lovely thread that many people did not expect, which was the music. An old and wistful song laid gently over all the sunlit chaos, its weathered voice and its long, aching melody giving the whole gaudy spectacle an unexpected undertow of melancholy. It was a strange and beautiful choice. To score a trailer full of alligators and influencers and neon excess with something so tender and so worn, and it told people something about the mood the makers were reaching for. A sweetness beneath the mayhem, a sense of longing running quietly under all the noise. And from that single song grew a whole gentle strand of dreaming about the music of the game itself, about the radio stations that had always been among the most beloved corners of these worlds, the invented stations and the borrowed songs and the murmuring hosts, the way a long drive across a virtual city could become, with the right music playing, a small and almost perfect kind of peace. Fans wondered what the airwaves of this sun-soaked place might hold, which old songs and which new ones, what strange and funny and lovely things might drift out of the speakers as they drove nowhere in particular through the warm night. What happened around those trailers was a phenomenon unto itself, an explosion of fan analysis so intense and so thorough that it became a kind of cottage industry. People slowed the footage down to a crawl, examined it frame by frame, zoomed in on license plates and street signs and the reflections in windows, cross-referenced every glimpse against maps and leaks and their own encyclopedic knowledge of the series. Countless videos and articles and long, obsessive online threads were devoted to dissecting a couple of minutes of footage, extracting every possible clue, arguing over the meaning of a single blurred sign in the background of a single shot. Never in the history of the medium had so few seconds of video been studied so exhaustively by so many people. Out of that frenzy of analysis grew a whole culture of anticipation, a shared language of memes and jokes, and in references that bound the fan base together across the long years of waiting. The game became a kind of running gag and a running dream all at once, a permanent fixture of internet culture, referenced endlessly, joked about, longed for, its every scrap of news greeted with the enthusiasm usually reserved for major world events. People who had never even played the earlier games got swept up in it, unable to escape the sheer gravitational pull of the hype. And the game became less a specific piece of entertainment than a shared cultural moment, a thing the whole online world was living through together. The anticipation had grown so large by then that it spilled far past the boundaries of the game itself, and soaked into the ordinary culture around it, into jokes told by people who had never once held a controller, into offhand references in television and music and advertising, into a shared shorthand that everyone somehow understood. Brands rushed to associate themselves with it, hoping a little of its gravity might rub off on them. Comedians built routines around the endless waiting, and the mere mention of it could summon a knowing laugh from almost anyone. It had become less a product than a piece of common weather, the thing simply in the air, referenced and joked about and longed for by a whole generation as a kind of collective in-joke and collective dream at once, so thoroughly woven into the culture that even people entirely indifferent to games could not quite escape its pull. There was something almost beautiful and something almost absurd in the scale of collective attention this game commanded, in the way millions of people from every corner of the world all leaned in at once to study the same few seconds of footage, to dream the same dreams, to wait together for the same distant thing. It was a rare kind of shared experience in a fragmented age, a thing that genuinely united an enormous and scattered audience in common anticipation, and whatever one thinks of the game itself, there is something striking about its power to gather so many eyes and so many hopes onto a single point on the horizon. There was something almost paradoxical too in how little the makers actually said through all of this, how rarely they spoke, how sparingly they revealed, a company sitting at the very centre of the loudest anticipation in the history of the medium, and choosing, for the most part, to say almost nothing at all. Long stretches of near total silence opened between the few things they showed, many months at a time, with no word, no image, no reassurance, only the quiet, and into that quiet the world poured its endless speculation. For a silence that deep becomes a kind of blank canvas, and people cannot help but paint their hopes and their fears across it. It was a strange strategy in an age of constant noise and constant marketing, this refusal to feed the machine, this trust that the hunger would only grow if it were left unfed, and it worked, for every rare scrap became an event precisely because there was so little of it. The silence itself became a kind of character in the story, a vast and patient quiet that the whole restless world leaned into, straining to hear something, anything, from the makers who had learned long ago that saying less was the surest way to make the world listen harder. The strangest part of all of it was how far the ripples spread beyond gaming, into the wider world of business and money and culture. The anticipation grew so enormous that it began to be talked about as an economic event, a game so big that its release might measurably move spending, might make people stay home, might even ripple through the numbers that economists watch. Companies quietly worried about launching anything near it. It stopped being merely a video game and became a kind of gravitational body, bending the whole entertainment world around its eventual arrival, a thing so anticipated that the mere question of when it would come out became a matter of genuine consequence. Which brings us, gently, to the most exhausting saga of all. The endless, agonizing story of when this game would actually be released. For a long time, the game was expected to arrive in 2025, and a whole world of fans arranged their hopes around that year, counting the months, imagining the autumn when they would finally get to play it. And then, gently but firmly, that hope was taken away, as Rockstar announced that the game would slip into the following spring, to a date in late May of 2026. It was a disappointment, but a manageable one, a few months to swallow, and most people accepted it with a sigh and reset their calendars, telling themselves that a game this enormous was surely worth the extra time to get right. But then, later, it happened again. With that spring date already circled and anticipated, Rockstar came back once more and pushed the game further still, all the way to a date in the late autumn of 2026, to the 19th of November, half a year beyond the promise they had just made. Twice now the finish line had been moved just as it came into view, and this second delay landed harder than the first, a growing suspicion settling over the fanbase that this game might simply keep proceeding, might always be a little further away than it seemed, a horizon that moves as you walk toward it. Rockstar, for its part, did something it rarely does, which was to apologise, to acknowledge directly that it was asking a great deal of patience from a great many people, and to explain that the extra time was needed to reach the level of polish and completeness the game demanded. It is a genuine tension, and worth sitting with, for on the one hand these enormous games take years and cannot be rushed without suffering, and everyone remembers the games that were pushed out too soon and arrived broken. And on the other hand, there is a real weariness in being asked again and again to wait just a little longer, to keep the faith, to trust that the date will hold this time when it did not hold the last two times. The whole gentle argument grew up around the delays, over whether they were in fact a bad thing at all. On one side stood the weary and impatient, the fans who had waited long enough and simply wanted to play, who felt each delay as a small betrayal, a promise broken. And on the other stood a more philosophical camp, who argued that a delay is almost always a gift, that a game given more time to be polished and completed is a better game, that everyone would far rather wait a few more months than receive something rushed and broken, as so many over-hurried games had been. The memory of games pushed out too soon, arriving as buggy, unfinished messes that took months of patching to fix, hung over the debate and lent real force to the argument for patience. There was wisdom on both sides, and a genuine tension that could not be fully resolved, for it is true that these enormous games cannot be rushed without harm, and also true that endless delays test the goodwill of even the most devoted audience. The makers, for their part, had built their whole reputation on refusing to release anything before it was ready, on taking whatever time was needed to reach their exacting standards, and that very refusal was a large part of why their games were so beloved and so trusted. So the delays, frustrating as they were, could be read as a sign of exactly the care and ambition that made people want the game so badly in the first place, a reassurance dressed up as a disappointment. Still, there is no denying the particular ache of anticipation deferred, the small grief of a circled date slipping away, and the makers seemed to understand this, which is why the second delay came wrapped in an apology, a rare acknowledgement that they were asking a great deal and were grateful for the patience. It was a more human gesture than the company usually made, a small crack in its famously guarded exterior, and it spoke to an awareness that the well of goodwill, however deep, was not bottomless, and that even the most anticipated game in the world could test the patience of its audience past the breaking point if the waiting stretched on too long. The company that owns Rockstar tried to reassure everyone, its chief executive stating plainly that the game would not slip again, that the November date was firm, that this time the wait would truly end when they said it would. But of course that is exactly what would be said whether or not it was true, and a fan base twice burned is slow to believe such promises, and so a low hum of doubt runs beneath all the anticipation. A quiet question that will not go away until the game is actually, finally in people's hands. Will it hold? Or will there be, somewhere down the line, one more apology, one more date, one more few months to wait? And then, at last, came the surest sign yet that this time the date might truly hold, for the makers opened the game up for pre-order, letting people all around the world reserve their copies months ahead, and even set a day, a little over a week before release, when those who had bought it could begin quietly downloading it onto their machines, so that they might step into the world the very moment it opened. You do not, as a rule, take people's money and schedule the download for a game you still secretly mean to delay, and so the opening of pre-orders landed like a long-held breath finally let go, a concrete and almost tender reassurance after all the broken promises, the first genuinely solid ground in years of shifting sand. Nothing is ever entirely certain until the day arrives, and a twice-burned fan base keeps one wary eye on the calendar still. But the wait, after everything, appears at last to be very nearly over. There is something almost philosophical in the whole ordeal of waiting for this game, in the strange modern experience of anticipating something so enormous for so long, that the waiting itself becomes a kind of shared cultural event, a thing people bond over and joke about and grow weary of together. Years of your life, in a sense, get quietly organised around a release date that keeps moving, and the game becomes less a thing you are going to play, and more a permanent fixture of the near future, always coming, never quite arrived. And beneath the surface of all that waiting, in the studios where the game is actually being made, a far more serious and human drama was unfolding, one that turned the story of the delays from a matter of impatience into a matter of genuine conscience. The second great delay, the one that pushed the game into late 2026, did not arrive alone. It came wrapped in headlines far more uncomfortable than any missed date. For around the very same time, a large group of workers at one of Rockstar's studios said that they had been fired, and the reason they were let go became a genuine controversy that has hung over the game ever since. More than 30 employees lost their jobs, and the two sides told very different stories about why. The company's account was that these workers had been dismissed for sharing confidential information in a public forum, a serious matter for any studio, and especially for one guarding the most anticipated game in the world against exactly the kind of leaks that had already plagued it. But the workers and the union that represents them told a very different story. They said that the people who were fired had been gathered not in any public place at all, but in a private online chat, a members-only space where employees were talking with union organisers about the possibility of forming a union, and that the firings were really about crushing that effort before it could take root. A case, as the union put it, of plain old union busting. The timing made it all the more charged, for the workers had been moving to formally organise to establish a recognised union within the studio right as the company was pushing toward the launch of its biggest game ever. To many onlookers, the sudden dismissal of dozens of the very people trying to organise at exactly that moment looked like something more than a coincidence, and the affair became a rallying point far beyond the studio itself. Supporters and fellow workers gathered outside Rockstar's offices in different cities around the world to protest, and the union set about challenging the firings through legal channels, with a full hearing scheduled to stretch across weeks, so that the question of what really happened would be argued out formally, in the light. Underneath the specific dispute lay a broader tension that had been building for a while, over the company's insistence that its people return to working in the office rather than from home. To the company, that policy was about productivity and about security, about keeping the secrets of an enormously valuable and enormously leak-prone project under closer control. To many of the workers, it was a source of real frustration, a rolling back of the flexibility they had come to rely on, and it became tangled up with the wider unhappiness that fed the push to organise in the first place. It is a story with no easy villains, a collision between a company's genuine need to protect an enormous secret and its workers' genuine need to be treated fairly and heard. The dispute at Rockstar did not happen in isolation, but as part of a broader stirring across the whole games industry, a growing movement among the people who make games to organise, to bargain collectively, to push back against the long hours and the sudden layoffs and the general precariousness that had come to define so many careers in the field. For a long time the industry had run on the passion of its workers, on the willingness of people who loved games to pour themselves into making them, sometimes at real cost to their health and their lives. And in recent years a reckoning had begun, a sense among workers that love for the work should not have to mean the acceptance of poor treatment. The events at Rockstar became, in that light, a flashpoint in a much larger and longer struggle. That larger context is part of why the firings drew such attention and such solidarity, why workers and supporters gathered outside the company's offices in cities far from the one where the dismissals happened. It was not only about those 30-some people, but about what their case might mean for everyone else in the industry, about whether the biggest and most successful studio in the world would be allowed to remove workers who tried to organise, or whether that would be challenged and stopped. The outcome of the legal fight, whatever it turns out to be, will send a signal far beyond one studio, and that is why so many people who will never make a game were watching it so closely. There is a poignancy in the timing of it all, in the fact that this struggle over the treatment of workers reached its sharpest point at the exact moment the company was preparing to release what may be the most successful piece of entertainment ever made. The enormous wealth the game is expected to generate, set against the dispute over the treatment of the very people making it, draws a stark and uncomfortable line, and it is a line that runs through the whole modern economy, not just this one company. The question of how the vast rewards of enormously successful work are shared among all the hands that help to make it. It is worth remembering as you drift here that behind every one of these enormous games are thousands of ordinary people, artists and programmers and writers and testers, living ordinary lives, worrying about their jobs and their hours and their futures, the same as anyone. The gleaming worlds that millions of us lose ourselves in are built by real human beings, and the question of how those human beings are treated, how their labour is valued, and their voices are heard, is a real and serious one, and it does not go away just because the end product is dazzling. The controversy over those firings is, at heart, a story about that question, about the human cost hidden beneath the polish, and it is one of the more sobering threads in the whole tangled tale. And it did not come out of nowhere, for the company had wrestled with the treatment of its workers before, in the making of the very game that came just before this one. Rockstar's reputation as a workplace had been a subject of concern for years, reaching back to the making of its previous masterpiece, the great Western game that came out at the end of the last decade. Around that game's release, one of the company's leaders spoke, in a moment of apparent pride, about the punishing hours the team had worked, mentioning weeks that had stretched to 100 hours, and the remark set off a firestorm. The idea that the beautiful, beloved world so many people were about to lose themselves in had been built on the backs of people working themselves to exhaustion sat uneasily with a lot of players, and it forced a public conversation about the human cost of these enormous productions. The company clarified and contextualized, explaining that the most extreme hours had applied only to a small group and only for a short stretch, and later reporting, drawn from many current and former staff, painted a more complicated picture, of long weeks and heavy pressure rather than round-the-clock ordeal for most, but of a real culture of expectation that people would give and give and give. In the wake of all that scrutiny, the company made genuine efforts to change, to reform its practices, to move away from the worst excesses of that grinding culture, and for a while it seemed that lessons had been learned, that the industry as a whole was reckoning with what it asked of the people who make its wonders. The whole episode became part of a much larger reckoning across the games industry over the practice that had come to be called crunch, the long stretches of overtime, often unpaid and often expected rather than requested, that had become an ingrained part of how many big games were made. For years it had been treated almost as a badge of honour, a sign of passion and dedication, and only slowly did the industry begin to recognise the real harm it did. The burnout and the broken health and the ruined relationships, the way it quietly used up the people who loved the work most. The conversation sparked by that Western games making was part of a broader awakening, a growing insistence that the wonders of the medium should not have to be built on the exhaustion of their makers. And that is part of why the more recent troubles landed so heavily, for they felt to many like a backsliding, a return to an old adversarial posture just when things had seemed to be improving. The push to bring everyone back into the office, the firings, the accusations of union busting, all of it seemed to undo some of the goodwill the company had worked to rebuild, and to reopen the old question of whether these dazzling games can only be made through the hard use of the people who make them. It is a question that hangs over the whole industry, not just this one company. The question of whether the wonders we love are worth the wear they put on their makers, and whether there might be a gentler way to build them. There is no simple answer to any of it, and it would be easy drifting off to want a clean villain and a clean hero, but the truth is muddier and more human than that. A company trying to protect an enormously valuable secret and to make something genuinely great, workers trying to be treated fairly and to have some say over their own lives, a fan base caught in the middle, wanting the game but uneasy about its cost. These are the ordinary, difficult tensions of making anything big and important in the modern world, and they do not resolve neatly, and perhaps the most honest thing to do is simply to hold them both in mind, the wonder and the cost, and to remember the people behind the pixels. But not all the controversies were so weighty. Some were about something much simpler and much closer to everyone's wallet, namely, the question of how much this thing was going to cost. For a long time now, a low, anxious debate has simmered among fans over how much this game will cost when it finally arrives, and it has become a controversy all its own, a proxy for larger worries about where the whole industry is heading. Games had long settled around a familiar price, but in recent years that ceiling had begun to crack, with a handful of big releases pushing the standard price upward. And many people feared that this game, the biggest and most expensive ever made, might be the one to push it higher still. Speculation ran up and down a wide range, from the old familiar figure to numbers that would have been unthinkable a few years ago, and every hint and rumour sent the discourse spinning. The fear was not really about this one game alone, but about what it might do to everything that came after, for a game this dominant sets the terms for the whole market, and if it launched at a higher price and the world paid it without complaint, then that new higher price might quietly become the new normal for everyone. So the debate carried a weight beyond itself, a sense that the cost of this single game might reset the cost of the entire hobby, and people watched for any signal about it with real anxiety, parsing the careful non-answers of company executives for clues that were slow for a long while in coming. Feeding all of it was the almost mythical sum the game was rumoured to have cost to make, figures that climbed into the hundreds of millions and, by some estimates, past $1 billion, which would make it not merely the most expensive game ever produced, but one of the most expensive single pieces of entertainment ever created by anyone, rivaling the budgets of the largest film franchises. Whether those exact numbers are true, no one outside the company can say, for they guard such things closely, but the sheer scale of the production, the years and the thousands of people and the obsessive detail made the enormous estimates easy to believe, and they fed the sense that the price to play might have to be enormous too. The reason the price question carried such weight was that games had for a very long time been anchored to a familiar number, a price that had held remarkably steady for years even as the cost of making games soared, and that anchor had recently begun to drag loose. A handful of major releases had crept above the old ceiling, testing whether players would accept a higher price, and each time the industry watched nervously to see how the audience would react. The fear around this game was that it might be the one to make the higher price permanent, that if the biggest game in the world launched above the old standard and sold in record numbers regardless, then every publisher would take note, and the new, higher price would quietly become the floor for everyone. There were quieter anxieties folded into it as well, about the many different editions the game would surely be sold in, the standard version and the fancier ones, the special packages stuffed with extra content and in-game currency at ever higher prices, the whole modern apparatus of tiered pricing that had become standard for big releases. Fans worried about how much of the full experience might be walled off behind the more expensive editions, about whether the base game would feel complete or whether it would nudge them, gently and constantly, towards spending more. It was less a single controversy than a cloud of related worries, all circling the same anxious question of how much this beloved thing was going to end up costing them in the end. Beneath all of it lay a genuine tension between the audience and the industry, a sense among players that games kept finding new ways to ask for more money. Through higher prices and special editions and in-game purchases and online spending, and a corresponding defensiveness from an industry facing genuinely rising costs. This game, sitting at the very summit of the medium, became the focal point for all those feelings, the place where the whole uneasy negotiation between what games cost to make and what players are willing to pay came to a head, and so even its price, long before it was ever announced, became a battleground, a proxy for much larger arguments about the future of the whole hobby. And when the price was finally revealed, it did indeed land above the old familiar ceiling, the standard version settling at just under 80, a clear and deliberate step up from the 60 that had held for a whole generation of games, with a richer and costlier edition stacked above it for those who wanted every extra the world had to offer. It was not the wildest of the feared figures, not the frightening numbers the most anxious had braced themselves for, but it was higher than the old normal all the same, and it seemed to confirm the quiet worry that the price of games had shifted upward for good, that this one, sitting atop the whole medium, had helped to set a new and higher floor that others would surely follow in time. The battleground, in the end, settled roughly where the more sober voices had always guessed it would, a little painful and not quite catastrophic, and quietly significant for everything that would come after it. There was another quieter controversy tucked alongside the price, over where the game could even be played at first, for it was announced only for the newest home consoles, with no version promised for personal computers at launch. This has long been Rockstar's pattern, releasing first on consoles and bringing a computer version along later, sometimes much later. But it stung a large and devoted portion of the audience all the same, the players who prefer their games on a computer and who would have to wait, no one knew how long, while everyone else played on. It became one more source of low-grade frustration, one more way the game asked for patience, one more line drawn between those who would get to play it soon and those who would have to keep waiting. Folded into the worry over price was a quieter dread about the many shapes the game might be sold in, and the small print that might come with them, the deluxe editions and the pre-order bonuses and the extra content parcelled out to those who paid the most, the whole familiar apparatus that had grown up around every big release. Some fans worried too about whether even the solitary story might one day require a constant connection to play, as so many games had come to, whether the world you wandered through alone might quietly depend on distant servers that would not stay switched on forever, so that the thing you had bought might not entirely be yours to keep. These were smaller anxieties, and perhaps unfounded ones, but they spoke to a deeper unease about the direction of the whole hobby, about ownership and permanence and the slow drift toward games as services rather than things, and they attached themselves to this game as they attached themselves to every large release now, one more low-worry humming beneath the anticipation. All of these money worries, the price and the platforms and the budget, point at something real about what this game has become, which is less a game than an event, an economic and cultural juggernaut so large that the ordinary questions of how much and where and when take on a weight they would never carry for anything smaller. It is strange to think of a video game as a thing that might move markets and reset industry standards and be argued over in the language of economics, and yet that is exactly what this one has become. A thing so big that even the price of it is a matter of genuine public debate. And speaking of things blown up far beyond their ordinary size, there is the strange and rather funny story of a man in Florida who saw himself, or thought he saw himself, in that very first trailer. In that first trailer, among the parade of colourful characters glimpsed for just a moment each, there was a man with wild, dyed hair and a heavily tattooed face, the kind of larger-than-life figure that the game's parody of Florida is full of, and a real man, a Florida local who had become a minor internet celebrity for his own strikingly tattooed face and colourful persona, saw that character flash across the screen and became convinced that Rockstar had stolen his likeness, had taken his face and his life and put them into their game without asking and without paying. And so began one of the odder little sideshows of the whole affair. This man, who went by a nickname that cast him as a kind of real-life clown of the Sunshine State, announced that he intended to sue the company, demanding a sum of money that started high and, in the telling, seemed to shift around into the millions of dollars for what he insisted was the theft of his image and his story. He gave the company a deadline, contacted a lawyer, and, in a detail that is hard not to smile at, even dyed his hair to more closely resemble the character he claimed had been stolen from him, as though strengthening the resemblance after the fact would strengthen his case. The trouble, of course, was that the character in the trailer was not really him. Not exactly. Just one more exaggerated Florida grotesque of the kind the series has always been full of, a type rather than a portrait. And the legal ground for any claim was shaky at best. And in time, the whole thing softened into something almost sweet and rather revealing about the pull of this game, for the man dropped his threats of a lawsuit entirely and changed his tune completely, no longer demanding to be paid for the theft of his likeness, but instead asking, more or less, to be let in. He suggested that the company simply work with him, throw him some money, let him voice the character, let him show up at events, let him help promote the game. It was a small and human turn, the fury of feeling stolen from giving way to the simple desire to be part of something enormous. And it says a great deal about the gravitational pull of this game that even a man who began by threatening to sue ended up essentially asking to join in. To be featured in the biggest game in the world, even as a parody, even without permission, had gone from an insult to an opportunity in his eyes, a chance at a kind of fame and belonging, and the whole strange arc of it, from lawsuit to audition, is one of the more purely entertaining threads in the tapestry of controversy around this game. There is something telling in the fact that a game not yet even released could generate a lawsuit over a character glimpsed for a single second in a trailer, a measure of how closely every frame was being watched, how much meaning people were reading into the smallest details, how the whole world was leaning in to examine this thing under a microscope. And that same intense scrutiny, that same tendency to read enormous significance into tiny glimpses, would fuel a controversy far larger and far angrier than one man's tattoos. A full-blown culture war fought over a game that, again, no one outside the studio had actually played. From the moment the world learned that the game would for the first time star a woman, and a Latina woman at that, a strange and heated argument broke out that had very little to do with anything anyone had actually played. To some corners of the internet, the choice of a female lead was itself a provocation, evidence that the series had gone soft, that it was chasing approval. that it had abandoned its old outlaw spirit in favour of ticking boxes. To others, the pushback was absurd, a manufactured outrage over the simple fact of a woman existing at the centre of a story, in a series that had, after all, always prided itself on going wherever it pleased and offending whomever it liked. Underneath that surface argument lay a deeper and more interesting anxiety, shared, in a funny way, by people on opposite sides, over whether the game would keep the biting satirical edge the series had always been known for. The whole soul of these games had always been satire, a gleeful, equal opportunity mockery of everything about the culture they parodied, sparing no one, skewering the powerful and the foolish alike, and a great many fans worried that the modern world had grown too sensitive, too quick to take offence, for that kind of savage comedy to survive. Would the game still dare to be cruel and cutting and wildly inappropriate, they wondered, or would it be softened and sanded down into something safer and duller? The irony, which both sides largely missed, was that the series had never really been on anyone's side to begin with. Its satire had always mocked everyone, the criminals and the police, the rich and the poor, the left and the right, the whole gaudy circus of the culture it depicted, and it had done so precisely by refusing to preach or to take a stand, by simply holding up an exaggerated mirror and letting people see the absurdity reflected in it. So the fear that it would suddenly become a piece of propaganda for one side or another rather misunderstood what it had always been, an equal opportunity offender, a show that laughed at all of it, and there was little reason to think it would suddenly change its nature now. It helps, in stepping back from the heat of it, to remember what this series had always actually been, which was one of the most fearlessly satirical works in the whole medium, a decades-long tradition of mocking absolutely everything about the culture it depicted. It had skewered the police and the criminals, the corporations and the activists, the wealthy and the poor, the media and the politicians, the whole gaudy pageant of a society drunk on money and image and violence. Its humour had often been crude and cruel and deliberately provocative, designed to make people uncomfortable, and it had never once positioned itself as the champion of any cause, preferring instead to laugh at all of them from a lofty, cynical distance. That was its nature, and it had always drawn outrage from one quarter or another precisely because it refused to spare anyone. Seen in that light, the anxiety that the game might suddenly become preachy or one-sided rather missed the point, for a game that mocks everyone cannot easily be claimed by anyone. And the more likely truth was that this new game would do exactly what its predecessors had done, take aim at the absurdities of the present moment from every angle at once, sparing neither the things one side holds dear nor the things the other does. The satire would very likely offend a little bit of everyone, as it always had, which is a strange kind of fairness, an equal opportunity irreverence that belongs to no camp and answers to no cause but the joke itself. There was, beneath the noise, a real and worthwhile question buried in all the argument, about whether satire itself can still function in a fractured and easily offended age, whether the kind of savage, everyone gets mocked comedy the series specialised in can still land when audiences have grown so quick to take offence, and so ready to read every joke as a statement of allegiance. It is a genuine cultural question, and this game, whenever it arrives, will be a real test of it, a chance to see whether the old fearless satire can still cut, or whether the culture has changed too much for it to work. But that test cannot be run until the game exists, which is why arguing about it now is a bit like reviewing a meal by describing the smell from 3 streets away. What made the whole argument so strange was that it was being waged, furiously and at length. over a game that not one of the people arguing had actually played, a game they knew only from 2 trailers and a handful of screenshots. People were projecting their hopes and their fears onto a mostly blank canvas, seeing in it whatever they were already inclined to see, treating a few seconds of footage as proof of whatever grand cultural thesis they already believed. It was, in that sense, less an argument about the game at all than an argument about the culture, using the game as a convenient battlefield, and it generated an enormous amount of heat and remarkably little light. There is something almost restful, drifting here, in stepping back from all of that noise and recognising it for what it was, a great deal of passionate certainty about something no one had seen, a storm of opinion with almost nothing solid at its centre. In time the game will actually arrive, and people will play it, and the reality of the thing will replace all this speculation, and the arguments will reshape themselves around what is actually there, rather than what everyone imagined. And that same gap between the little that is known and the vast amount that is only guessed at is the exact space where the other half of this whole saga lives. Not the controversies, but the theories, the endless, imaginative, obsessive dreaming about what this game might actually be. And there is no theory more beloved, or more argued over, than the one about the size and shape of the world itself. The world of this game is a fictional version of Florida, a whole invented state that fans came to know by the name given to it in the game, a sun-drenched land of beaches and swamps and neon cities, with a returning parody of Miami at its heart. And from almost the moment the trailers appeared, the great obsession of the fan base became the question of exactly how big this world would be, how much of that imagined Florida you would actually get to explore, and the theories grew wilder and more elaborate by the month. The prevailing belief, pieced together from the trailers and from leaks and from careful study, was that this map would be enormous, far larger than the already vast world of the previous game, with many estimates settling on something like 2.5 times the size, a world so big it would take real time simply to drive across. The dedication that fans poured into mapping this unreleased world is genuinely astonishing, a labour of collective love bordering on obsession. Communities of enthusiasts gathered every scrap of data they could find, every frame of every trailer, every leaked image, every official screenshot, and began painstakingly assembling them into their own best guess at the full map, building interactive versions online that let anyone wander around a rough sketch of a world that did not yet exist. They pieced together coastlines and highways and city blocks from fragments, argued over the placement of a single building, and slowly, collaboratively, conjured up a shared vision of a place none of them had ever set foot in, a kind of communal dream of a country not yet born. Their theorized world stretched well beyond the returning city, out into a whole state's worth of varied landscapes, the alligator-haunted swamps of the Everglades, the long chains of sun-bleached islands trailing off into the sea, the small strange towns of the interior, the beaches and the marinas, and the endless sprawl. Fans dreamed of a world that would capture the full, sweaty, chaotic character of the real Florida, its wildlife and its weather, and its particular brand of weirdness, and they built their expectations up into something enormous, a playground of almost limitless variety, the biggest and most detailed world the series had ever attempted. The comparisons fans drew to convey the theorized size of the world were vivid and endless, measuring it against the maps of previous games, against real cities and real states, against the time it would take to drive from one end to the other. They spoke of a world so large that simply exploring it fully might take weeks, of hidden corners that most players would never find, of a scale that would dwarf anything the series had built before. And there was a particular delight in imagining the sheer variety such a world might hold. The way a single game might contain a glittering modern city and a lonely swamp and a chain of tropical islands and a stretch of rural nowhere. Whole different worlds stitched together into one seamless place. The community mapping projects that grew up around all this speculation deserve a moment of real admiration, for they were extraordinary feats of collective, patient effort, hundreds of strangers pooling their knowledge to reconstruct a world that did not yet exist. They built detailed, interactive maps that anyone could explore, marking every location that had been glimpsed or leaked or reasoned out, updating them constantly as new fragments emerged, arguing respectfully over every uncertain placement. It was fan devotion raised to the level of genuine scholarship, a labour of love so thorough that the fan-made maps became reference points in their own right, shared and studied across the whole community, a shared dream given careful collaborative form. There is something genuinely moving in that collective effort, in the image of so many people, scattered across the world and unknown to one another, joining together to lovingly reconstruct an imaginary place, purely for the joy of it, purely out of longing to walk its streets. It captures something essential about the whole phenomenon, the way this game had become a focus for an enormous amount of creativity and community and shared dreaming, a blank space onto which people poured their imagination and their care. The maps they built were, in a sense, monuments to the waiting itself, beautiful and elaborate structures raised in the long empty years before the real thing arrived. Naturally, the theories sometimes ran far ahead of any evidence, and some of the wilder ones had to be gently set aside. There were persistent dreams that the map might somehow encompass far more than one state, that it might grow over time to cover the whole country, that it might connect back to the cities of the older games into one impossibly vast world. Most of these grander fantasies had little real basis, and the more grounded fans worked hard to separate the plausible from the merely wished for, but the very existence of such dreams says something about the scale of expectation, about how completely people had convinced themselves that this game would be not merely large, but limitless. Beneath all the map theories runs a simple, almost childlike longing, the desire for a world so complete and so alive that you could simply live inside it, wander it endlessly, always finding some new corner, some new detail, some new small wonder. It is the same longing that has always driven these games, the dream of a place that feels genuinely real, genuinely inhabited, genuinely worth getting lost in. And the fervour of the map theories is really just the fervour of that dream, projected onto an unreleased world and magnified by years of waiting. And that dream of a living world is bound up tightly with the other great object of theory and speculation, the two people you will actually be living in that world as, the criminal lovers at the heart of the story. At the heart of the game are two characters, the woman introduced in that first prison jumpsuit and the man bound to her. A pair of lovers and criminals whose story the trailers framed as a modern retelling of the old outlaw legend. Two people in love, robbing their way across a dangerous world, headed, everyone suspects, toward a reckoning. That framing set off a whole industry of story theories, for a tale built on the shape of that famous doomed romance carries certain expectations, and fans immediately began dreaming about how the story might unfold, and, more anxiously, about how it might end. The most persistent and painful of these theories circles the question of whether one of the two lovers might die. The old legend that the story seems to echo ends, famously in blood. The two outlaws gun down together at the end of their run, and a great many fans have braced themselves for the possibility that this game too might end in tragedy, that one or both of these characters they were coming to love might not make it out alive. Others theorise about betrayal, about the two lovers turning on each other, about the classic crime story arc of trust curdling into suspicion as the stakes rise and the money grows and the walls close in. The dual nature of the leads, the ability to play as both, only deepens the speculation, raising questions about whether their paths might diverge, whether the player might be made to choose between them, whether the story might force some terrible decision. There is rich speculation too about the beginnings rather than the endings, about how the woman came to be in that prison jumpsuit in the first place, what crime or misfortune put her there, and how she and her partner first came together. Fans have spun elaborate backstories from the smallest hints in the trailers, imagining her history, her family, her reasons, building whole imagined lives for characters they have seen for only a handful of seconds. It is a testament to how vivid even those brief glimpses were, how much personality the two leads projected in their few moments on screen, that people felt they knew them well enough to dream entire histories for them. The mechanics of playing two characters at once gave rise to their own detailed theories, for the makers had experimented before with letting players switch between multiple protagonists, and fans dreamed about how that idea might be deepened here, in a story built around two people bound together by love. They imagined being able to slip from one lover to the other, seeing the same events from two perspectives, splitting up to tackle a heist from two angles, or being separated by the story and made to fight your way back to each other. The romantic core of the pairing raised tantalising questions no previous game had faced, about whether the bond between the two might be tracked and tested, whether your choices as one might affect the other, whether the relationship itself might be something the game asked you to tend. There is something genuinely new, many feel, in placing a love story at the very centre of a series that had so often been about lone men moving through the world with nobody truly beside them. And that novelty carries its own quiet hope, that this game might have a tenderness the others largely lacked, a warmth at its core beneath all the crime and the chaos. A story about two people who actually need each other, who might comfort or betray or save one another, opens emotional territory these games had rarely entered, and fans dream of the small human moments such a story might hold, the quiet scenes between the heists, the ordinary tenderness of two people in love and in trouble. The way even outlaws must sometimes simply sit together in the dark and be afraid. It would be a softer, more intimate thing than the series had usually attempted, and there is real longing in the hope that the makers will let that softness in, will let the love be as real as the violence. Fans theorised too about the tone the story might strike, about whether it would lean into the giddy, romantic thrill of two outlaws in love against the world, or into the darker, more tragic register the source legend implies, the sense of a doomed romance racing toward an inevitable and violent end. The best crime stories hold both at once, the intoxicating freedom of the outlaw life and the creeping dread of where it must lead, and many hope this game will capture that bittersweet mixture, the joy and the doom braided together, so that even at its most thrilling there is a shadow over it, the knowledge that this kind of love and this kind of life rarely end well. There is speculation as well about the supporting cast that will surround the two leads, the friends and rivals and enemies they will meet on their run. the colourful criminals and crooked officials and desperate hangers-on that these games have always filled their worlds with. Fans dream of memorable villains and tragic allies, of a rich ensemble to give the central romance its context and its stakes, and they pass the trailers for every glimpsed face, building theories about who each one might be and how they might figure into the lover's story. The world of the game, they hope, will be as full of vivid people as it is of vivid places. Woven through all these story theories is a genuine and rather touching investment in these two fictional people, a real emotional stake in how their story turns out, built up over years of waiting and wondering. People have come to care about the fates of characters whose story they cannot yet play, to hope that these two lovers might somehow beat the odds and escape the doom the legend promises, to dread the possibility of losing one of them. It is a strange thing, to grieve in advance for characters who do not yet fully exist, and yet that is exactly the kind of deep anticipatory attachment this game has managed to create. The sense that its story matters enormously before a word of it has actually been told. There is endless speculation as well about the sheer shape and scale of the story the two lovers will move through, about how long it might be and how it might branch, about whether the choices you make might bend its course toward one ending or another, as some of the makers' earlier games had quietly allowed. People dream of a story that might unfold differently depending on how it is played, that might let the bond between the two lovers strengthen or fray by slow degrees, that might offer more than one way for their run to end, a happier road and a darker one, held open until the very last moment. Whether the game will actually work this way, no one can say, for the makers have kept their story almost entirely hidden, but the wondering itself has become a small pleasure, the quiet imagining of all the ways a single tale might be told. There are gentler theories too, that the two lovers might not be the only people you come to inhabit, that the story might widen to let you slip into other lives along the way, as the previous game had done with its three tangled protagonists. Some fans, poring over the earliest stolen footage and the later trailers alike, half convinced themselves that they had glimpsed hints of others, further faces that might one day prove playable, further threads that might braid quietly into the central romance. Most of this remains pure hopeful guesswork, unconfirmed and perhaps unfounded, but it speaks to a longing for a story generous and sprawling enough to hold many lives at once, a whole crowded world of them, rather than only the two at its heart. And that emotional weight, that sense that the story might genuinely move people, points to one of the quieter theories about the game, the belief that beneath all its satire and its crime and its chaos, it might have a real and beating heart, a story of love and loss and desperation that lands with the emotional force of the company's great western epic. For that game, the one about the dying outlaw, had proven that these makers could break your heart as easily as they could make you laugh, and many fans dream that this new game might do the same, might wrap a genuine tragedy inside its gaudy criminal playground. And that gaudy playground itself, the modern world the story would unfold in, is its own object of fascinated theory. Where the beloved older version of this city had been a parody of the 1980s all cocaine and pastel suits and synth music, this new version would be a parody of the world as it is right now, and that has fans dreaming about exactly how the game will skewer the strange culture of the present day. The trailers were already full of the signs of it. People filming themselves on their phones, viral videos and social media clout, the whole modern circus of influencers and internet fame, and fans expect the game to take aim at all of it, to hold up its cruel and funny mirror to a culture obsessed with screens and followers and the performance of one's own life. The theories about the satire run in 100 directions, imagining how the game will mock the world of viral crime, of people committing robberies to go viral, of foolishness broadcast live for an audience, of the strange collapse of the line between doing a thing and filming yourself doing it. They imagine parodies of streaming culture and gig economy apps and cryptocurrency schemes and the endless hustle of the modern internet, the whole absurd landscape of digital life rendered into the game's gleeful, exaggerated comedy. If the old game had captured the excess of its decade, this one, fans hope, will capture the particular madness of ours. The way everyone has become a broadcaster and a brand and a mark all at once. There was a faint unease, for some, in just how closely the game's parody seemed to hug the real world, for the first look had appeared to draw on actual viral moments, real scenes that had circulated online, real oddities plucked from the endless feed and folded into the game's exaggerated mirror. It raised a quiet and genuinely interesting question about where parody ends and real lives begin, about the strangeness of a game built partly by watching the same videos everyone else was watching and reflecting them back, larger and sharper, until people were not always sure whether they were laughing at an invention or at something that had really happened to a real person. The makers had always worked this way, holding a funhouse mirror up to the culture, but the culture had never before been so thoroughly documented, so endlessly filmed, and there was something newly uncanny in seeing the raw material of real online life pressed into the service of satire, a blurring of the line between the world and its reflection that felt very much of the present moment. There is a special anticipation, too, around the way the game might parody the specific culture of its setting, the real and semi-mythical figure of the wild man of Florida, the endless strange news stories that have made the state a kind of national punchline, the alligators and the hurricanes and the flamboyant characters, and the general sense of a place where anything might happen. The setting is almost too perfect a target for the series' brand of satire, a real place that already feels like a parody of itself, and fans dream of a game that will lean all the way into that strangeness, that will make the whole gaudy, sweaty, chaotic character of the place into comedy. Beneath the comedy, many hope the place itself will carry a real mood, a particular beauty and a particular sadness that the setting lends itself to, the melancholy of faded glamour and endless summer, of pastel buildings going slowly to seed in the salt air, of a paradise that is always a little too hot and a little too bright and a little too desperate underneath. The best of these worlds had always been more than jokes and mayhem, for they had a genuine sense of place, a weather and a light and a loneliness all their own. And fans dream that this sun-soaked state will have that too. The long empty highways at dusk, the neon reflected in wet streets, the strange stillness of a beach town in the off-season, all the quiet, aching atmosphere that makes a virtual place feel like somewhere a person could actually grow homesick. 4. Fans dream too about the fake media the game will surely be filled with, the parody radio stations and invented television shows and satirical advertisements that had always been among the most beloved parts of these games. They imagine a modern world of streaming services and podcasts and social feeds, all lovingly mocked, a whole fake internet you could browse within the game, full of absurd websites and viral nonsense and pointed jabs at the real digital culture. The previous games had turned their fake radio and fake ads into a genuine art form, hours of comedy hidden in the background of the world, and fans cannot wait to see what this new game will do with the far richer and stranger media landscape of the present day. There is a particular relish in imagining how the game will parody the specific absurdities that have risen up since the last game. The influencer economy and the crypto schemes and the gig work apps. The strange new ways people make and lose money and chase fame in the modern world. The culture has grown so self-parodying, so full of genuine absurdity, that fans wonder how the game will manage to exaggerate a reality that already seems beyond exaggeration, and they delight in the challenge of it, in the thought of these makers turning their satirical eye on a present moment that so richly deserves it. Beneath the comedy, though, some fans theorise about something sharper, about a game that might have real things to say about the present moment, about inequality and desperation and the hollowness of the influencer dream, about the way the modern hustle grinds people down even as it dazzles them. The series had always hidden a genuine cynicism about the culture beneath its jokes, a real argument about the emptiness at the heart of the dream it depicted, and many hope this new game will carry that tradition forward. Will use its parody of the present to say something true and a little bit sad about the world we actually live in. The satire, at its best, was never just for laughs. All of this remains, of course, pure speculation, dreams spun from a few seconds of footage, and the reality may be sharper or softer or simply different from anything the theories imagine. But the very richness of the speculation, the way people have built entire visions of the game's comedy and its critique from almost nothing, speaks to how much they trust these makers to get the satire right, to see the culture clearly and skewer it well. And that trust extends into another realm of theory entirely, the vast and uncertain question of what will happen not in the game's story at all, but in the endless shared world that will surely grow up alongside it. The online playground where millions expect to spend years of their lives. The previous game in the series had become famous not only for its story, but for the enormous online world that grew up beside it. A shared playground where millions of players lived out their criminal fantasies together for well over a decade, and that online mode became one of the most profitable pieces of entertainment ever made. So it is a near certainty in the minds of most fans that this new game will have its own online world, and a huge amount of theory and anxiety swirls around what that world will be like, how it will work, and above all, how it will make its money. That last question is the anxious heart of it, for the online world of the previous game had come to rely heavily on players spending real money on in-game cash and items, and many fans worry that the new online world might lean even harder into that model, might be built from the ground up to encourage and even pressure players into spending. The dream is of a vast, generous, endlessly entertaining shared world, and the fear is of a world designed first and foremost to extract money, its fun carefully rationed to nudge players toward their wallets. Which of these it turns out to be will shape the experience of millions for years, and so the theories about its monetization carry a real and understandable worry. There are gentler theories too about all the things this new online world might allow, the features fans have dreamed of for years, larger worlds and richer roleplay and deeper customization, the ability to build and own and create within the shared space, to live a fuller second life inside the game. The community that had grown up around the previous online world had developed elaborate ways of playing together, whole subcultures of role players and racers and builders, and they dream of a new world that will give them even more room to make their own fun, to tell their own stories, to build their own communities inside the game's enormous playground. Something remarkable had grown up inside that older shared world over its long life. Whole communities that treated it less as a game than as a stage or a town. People who gathered there every night to play elaborate invented roles, to run imaginary businesses and act out imaginary lives, to broadcast their adventures to audiences of thousands and, in some cases, to build entire livelihoods out of simply existing inside it. A virtual world had quietly become a real social space, a place where friendships formed, and communities cohered, and people found a sense of belonging they sometimes could not find elsewhere. And the hope for the new world is that it might hold even more room for that, more tools for people to make their own stories and their own homes and their own gatherings inside it, a fuller and more welcoming second world to disappear into together. There is a practical anxiety threaded through it as well, over what will happen to the old online world when the new one arrives, whether the years of progress and purchases that players had poured into it might carry over or might simply be left behind, whether the communities built there might migrate or might scatter. For many people, the old shared world had become a genuine home, a place tied up with friendships and memories and countless hours of their lives, and the prospect of its eventual sunset, whenever it comes, carries a real melancholy, the strange grief of an imaginary place that had become real to the people who lived in it. There is a whole strand of theory about how the online world might launch and grow, whether it would arrive alongside the main game or a little after, as had happened before, whether it would start small and expand over the years, or arrive already vast. Fans remembered how the previous online world had grown from modest beginnings into something enormous over more than a decade of constant additions, and they wondered whether this new one might follow the same slow path, or whether the makers, having learned so much, might launch something far more complete from the very start. The prospect of watching a new shared world grow and evolve over years, of being there from the beginning and living through its whole history, held its own particular appeal. Fans also theorised about the tension, long felt in the previous online world, between the players who wanted to cause chaos and the players who wanted to build and roleplay and simply exist in peace, and about whether the new world might do a better job of holding space for both. The previous shared world had become notorious for the way a peaceful session could be shattered by other players hunting you for sport, and many dreamed of a new world with better tools for choosing the kind of experience you wanted, gentler spaces for those who simply wished to live quietly inside the game. It was a small but heartfelt hope, the wish for a shared world that could be a refuge as well as a battleground. There is a strand of theory that reaches far into the future, past the launch and past the first year, into the dream of a shared world so rich and so lasting that people might live inside it for a decade or more, the way they had lived inside the last one, returning to the same streets night after night for years, watching it grow and change around them as their own lives grew and changed alongside it. These games had stopped being things you finished and set down, and become instead places you kept coming back to, and many fans imagined this new world as a kind of second home they might inhabit for a very long time, a constant in the background of their lives, always there to return to when the day was done. There is something both lovely and a little melancholy in that, in the thought of a virtual place becoming so woven into real years that leaving it, whenever the day finally came, would feel like leaving somewhere a person had actually lived. All of these online theories point at a truth about what these games have become, which is that they are no longer merely stories to be finished, but worlds to be lived in, ongoing places that persist and grow and gather communities around themselves for years on end. The story of the two lovers will have an ending, but the online world will not, or not for a very long time. And for a great many players it is that endless shared world, more than any story, that they are truly waiting for, the promise of a place to belong for years to come. And the question of belonging, of connection, runs into another whole territory of theory, the tangled and much-loved question of how this new world might connect to all the worlds the series has built before. The series had built many worlds over the years, many cities and many stories, and long-time fans have always believed that these worlds are quietly connected, that the games share a single continuity, that characters and places from one might reappear in another. And so a rich vein of theory concerns which old faces and old places might return in this new game, which threads from the decades of the series might be picked back up, which beloved characters from earlier games might make an appearance, aged and changed by the years. Fans pore over every trailer looking for hints of familiar names, for cameos, for connections, dreaming of reunions with characters they have loved for a very long time. The return of the parody of Miami is itself the biggest such connection, for that city had been the setting of one of the most beloved games in the whole series, a game set decades earlier, and its reappearance in a modern form invites endless speculation about how the two versions might relate, whether the older story's characters might still be around, aged and grizzled, whether the city's history might carry forward, whether there might be nods and echoes and Easter eggs buried throughout for those who remember the earlier game. The idea of walking through a familiar city transformed by the passage of decades, of finding the ghosts of an old story in a new one, is a deeply appealing one, and fans dream of all the ways the game might reward their long memories. There are wilder connection theories too, dreams of characters from other games entirely wandering into this one, of the series' scattered protagonists somehow crossing paths, of a great convergence of all the stories the series had ever told. Most of these are pure wish fulfillment, unlikely to come true, for the makers have generally kept their stories separate and self-contained, but the very existence of such dreams speaks to how much these worlds and characters mean to people, how badly they want to see them again, how the series has become, over the decades, a kind of shared mythology that fans long to see woven together. Even the unlikeliest theories are really just expressions of love, a desire to have all the beloved pieces gathered into one place. There is real disagreement among fans about how much the game should connect to what came before. For some long for a dense web of callbacks and returning faces, a game that rewards decades of loyalty with reunion after reunion, while others argue that too much of that would weigh the game down, that it should stand on its own, tell its own story, introduce its own characters, and let the old worlds rest. It is a gentle tension between nostalgia and freshness, between the comfort of the familiar and the thrill of the new, and the makers have generally leaned toward the new, giving each game its own protagonists and its own self-contained story, so that the wilder reunion dreams are probably destined to remain just that. Dreams, still, the smaller connections. The Easter eggs and background nods and quiet references are almost certain to be there in abundance, for the makers have always loved to reward attentive fans with such things, to bury little gifts throughout their worlds for those who know where to look. Fans dream of the moment they will stumble upon some familiar landmark transformed by the years, some old business still standing, some background detail that winks at a beloved earlier game, and the anticipation of that quiet pleasure, the joy of recognition, is its own small thread in the great tapestry of theory. Beyond the returning characters, fans theorize endlessly about the hidden secrets the game will surely contain, the Easter eggs and mysteries that makers love to bury in their worlds. These games had always been full of such things, strange sights hidden in remote corners, cryptic messages, rumours of monsters and ghosts, and impossible discoveries, and fans expect this new world to be riddled with them, and are already, before the game is even out, preparing to comb every inch of it for secrets. The hunt for hidden things had become a beloved tradition of its own, a communal treasure hunt that could sustain a game for years, and the anticipation of all the mysteries this vast new world might hold is its own quiet source of joy. There is a particular delight in imagining the strangest secrets of all, the eerie and inexplicable things these makers love to bury in the loneliest corners of their worlds, the rumoured monsters and ghosts and impossible sights that fans had spent years hunting through earlier games, some of them taking whole communities working patiently together many long months to finally uncover. People dream that this new world will hold its own such mysteries, cryptic messages carved where almost no one will ever look, strange figures glimpsed at the edge of the swamp at night, quiet puzzles laid down by the makers as private gifts to the most devoted and obsessive among their players. The hunt for these hidden things had become a beloved ritual of its own. A slow communal detective story that could keep a game alive in people's imaginations for years after they had finished it, and the thought of all the undiscovered strangeness this vast new place might contain is its own small delicious anticipation, a promise of mysteries not yet even glimpsed. All of these connection theories, the returning faces and the hidden secrets and the dreamed of reunions, come down to the same deep wish, the wish for continuity, for a world that remembers, for the sense that all the hours poured into all the earlier games might somehow be honoured and carried forward into this new one. It is the wish to come home to something familiar even as you explore something new, to find the old ghosts waiting in the new world, and it is one of the tenderest of all the theories, rooted in years of love for these worlds and the people in them. And that love of the world itself, of its texture and its detail, and its sense of being genuinely alive, feeds perhaps the most technical and the most awestruck theories of all. The ones about just how staggeringly detailed and lifelike this new world might turn out to be. The makers of this game had built their reputation on an almost fanatical devotion to detail, on worlds so dense and so alive that players spoke of them not as games but as places, and the trailers for this new game seemed to promise a leap even beyond what had come before. And so fans have spun endless theories about just how detailed and how lifelike this new world might be, about crowds of people each living their own lives, about weather that rolls in and transforms the whole feel of a place, about animals and traffic and the 1,000 small reactive systems that might make the world feel genuinely, overwhelmingly real. Every frame of the trailers was studied for evidence of this, every reflection and shadow and small animation held up as proof of some new height of realism. There was a quieter, more technical worry threaded through all the wonder, a nagging question of whether the machines people actually owned could hold a world so dense and so alive, whether all that promised detail might come at a hidden cost, in a world that stuttered or blurred or ran a little less smoothly than the dream demanded. Some wondered how fluidly it would all really move, whether the sheer weight of the simulation might force quiet compromises, whether the version they played at home would truly match the polished vision of the trailers, or fall a little short of it in ways only careful eyes would ever notice. It was the eternal tension of ambition pressing against the limits of the hardware, and it lent a faint edge of anxiety to the awe, a worry that the very scale that made the world so extraordinary might also be the thing that strained the machines meant to run it, and that some small part of the dream might have to be quietly surrendered to make the whole thing work at all. The theories reach into the smallest imaginable details, into dreams of shops you can enter and characters who remember you, of a world that responds to your every action, of puddles that form in the rain and dry in the sun, of a level of simulation so deep that the world seems to carry on its own life whether or not you were watching. Fans took the astonishing detail of the maker's previous games, the Western epic where the snow held your footprints and the mud dried on your coat, and imagined it carried forward and multiplied, applied now to a sprawling modern city full of technology and crowds and chaos, and the vision they conjured was of the most detailed interactive world ever built. Much of this speculation gathers around the technology said to be powering the game, the maker's own sophisticated engine, refined over many years, capable of rendering enormous worlds in astonishing detail, and of giving characters and crowds a strange, lifelike, improvised quality. Fans dream about what this new and more powerful version of that technology might allow, about crowds that behave with real individuality, about physics and animation so convincing that the line between a game and a living world grows thin. The technical theories can grow quite deep and quite passionate. A whole community of people trying to reason out, from a few seconds of footage, exactly how the impossible seeming detail of the trailers might actually be achieved. The specific detail dreams could grow wonderfully elaborate, extending into fantasies of a world where every building might be enterable, where every character in the crowd might have their own name and their own routine, where the smallest gestures and interactions might carry a lifelike weight. Fans took the tiny marvels of the maker's previous games, the way a character might react to being bumped, the way an animal might behave, the way the world remembered small things, and multiplied them in their imaginations into a world of almost limitless responsiveness, a place where nothing was mere scenery and everything might react, whether the real game reaches those heights or falls a little short. The very scale of the dreaming reveals how much trust these makers had earned, how completely people believed them capable of building the impossible. There were also more anxious detail theories, worries that the game might be so ambitious that it could not run smoothly, that the sheer density of its world might strain even the newest machines, that all the promised detail might come at the cost of performance or stability. These technical anxieties ran alongside the technical dreams, the two feeding on each other, hope and worry entwined, as fans tried to reason out whether the world they were imagining was actually possible on the hardware that would run it, or whether some of the dream would have to be sacrificed to make it work. It was a very modern kind of speculation, this weighing of ambition against the limits of the machine, and it filled countless discussions. There is a particular flavour of theory around the idea of a truly living economy and society within the game, a world where businesses rise and fall, where the news reacts to your deeds, where the whole simulated society hums along with a life of its own. The makers had always reached toward this, toward worlds that felt like functioning ecosystems rather than mere backdrops, and fans dream that this new game might reach further still, might build a society so complete that it feels less like a stage set and more like a real place you have wandered into, going about its business with or without you. It is the oldest dream in these games, the dream of a world that is truly alive, and the theories are really just that dream, sharpened by hope and years of waiting. A particular tenderness gathers around the dream of the weather, for the place the game parodies is a land of sudden storms and heavy heat, of afternoon downpours and gathering hurricanes, and fans imagine a sky that truly lives, clouds that build and break, rain that sweeps in off the sea and turns the neon streets to rivers of coloured light, storms so large that a person might watch them coming from far away across the flat land. The maker's previous games had already shown how much a living sky could do to a world, how a single change in the weather could change the whole feeling of a place, and people dream of this new world carrying that further still, of hurricanes that might roll in and transform everything, of the strange green stillness that comes before a storm, of the long golden calm after it finally passes. There is a matching dream about the wild things that might fill such a world. The alligators sliding through the swamp water, the birds wheeling over the marshes, the strange and abundant creatures that make the real version of this place feel half wild even in the middle of its cities. Fans imagine an entire living ecosystem beneath the human chaos. Animals with their own behaviours and their own small dramas, a swamp that feels genuinely inhabited, a sea that teems, a wilderness pressing quietly in at the edges of the neon, and they dream of the slow hours a person might spend, simply out there among it all, far from the noise, watching the wildlife go about its ancient business as though no game were happening at all. Beneath all the technical speculation lies a simple, almost innocent wonder, an awe at what these makers might have managed to build, a desire to be transported somewhere that feels utterly real. The fervour of the detail theories is really the fervour of that wonder, the excitement of imagining a world more complete and more alive than any that has come before, a place you could lose yourself in completely. And that sense of a game so enormous and so complete that it seems to promise something new, something beyond what games have been, feeds the grandest theory of all, the belief that this single game might actually change the whole medium and even ripple out into the world beyond it. The grandest theory of all, whispered and argued and half believed across the whole fan base, is that this game will not merely be a great game, but a genuine turning point. A thing so enormous and so successful that it reshapes the entire industry around it, the way a handful of games across history have done. Fans imagine it setting new standards that every game after it will be measured against, raising the bar for scale and detail and ambition so high that the whole medium is forced to rise with it, or else look small by comparison. They imagine developers everywhere quietly delaying their own games to avoid being crushed beneath it. Imagine whole years of the industry's calendar bending around its release. The theory reaches beyond gaming entirely, into the wider world of money and culture, into the belief that this game might be so large an event that it registers in the actual economy, that its release might measurably change how people spend their time and their money, might keep them home, might ripple through the numbers that measure a nation's spending. It sounds absurd, a video game large enough to move an economy, and yet the sheer scale of the anticipation, the hundreds of millions of people waiting, the billions of dollars in play, make it strangely plausible. And serious people have discussed it in serious terms, treating the game's release as a genuine economic event to be planned around. There is a theory too about what this game might mean for the very idea of what games can be, the belief that it might prove, once and for all, that a video game can be the biggest and most important piece of entertainment in the world, larger than any film or album or show, the centre of the culture rather than a niche pursuit at its edges. If it becomes, as many expect, the most successful entertainment product ever released, then it might complete a long transformation, the arrival of games at the very centre of global culture, no longer the toys they were once dismissed as, but the dominant art form of the age. The commercial expectations attached to this game are almost dizzying to contemplate, for the previous game had already become one of the most profitable pieces of entertainment ever made, earning sums that dwarf the biggest films in history. And this new game is widely expected to surpass even that. Fans and analysts alike imagine it becoming the fastest selling game ever, breaking records within hours of release, earning back its enormous cost in a matter of days, going on to sell for years and to sustain an online world that might generate money for another decade or more. The numbers people casually toss around are the kind that belong to national economies, not to single pieces of entertainment, and yet for this one game they somehow seem plausible. There is a particular weight too in the fact that this game does not arrive into an empty field, but into the long shadow of its own predecessor, one of the most beloved and most played games ever made, a world so many people had lived in for so many years that it had quietly become a kind of home. To follow that, to replace it in people's hearts, is a strange and daunting task. For the previous game had not merely been successful, but genuinely beloved, patched and expanded and inhabited for well over a decade, and there is a real question, softly asked, of whether people will actually be willing to leave it behind, to abandon the world and the friends and the memories they had built there, and begin again somewhere new. The makers must not only make something great, but must persuade an enormous and settled population to pull up roots and move, and that, in its own way, is nearly as tall an order as building the thing at all. There is a theory, half serious and half joking, that the game's release might function almost like a public holiday, a day when a significant slice of the population simply stays home to play, when productivity dips and other entertainment goes quiet, and the whole culture pauses to disappear into a single game at once. It sounds like an exaggeration, and perhaps it is, but the previous game had shown glimpses of exactly this kind of cultural gravity, and this one is expected to be far larger still. So the idea of a game so big that it briefly bends the rhythm of ordinary life is not as absurd as it first sounds. It would be, if it happened, a genuinely remarkable moment, a video game as a shared global event on the scale of a major sporting final or a moon landing. And yet, threaded through all this grandeur, there is a quieter and more sceptical theory, a worry that the anticipation has grown so enormous that no game, however brilliant, could possibly live up to it, that years of dreaming have built expectations no reality could satisfy. Some fans brace themselves gently for disappointment, reminding each other that it is in the end only a game, that it cannot cure loneliness or fix the world or be the perfect thing that years of longing have imagined, that whatever arrives will be a real and finite and imperfect thing, rather than the boundless dream everyone has been building in their heads. It is a wise and gentle caution, a reminder to hold the anticipation lightly, and it sits, a little sadly, beneath all the grand theories of transformation. Perhaps the truest theory of all is simply that no one knows, that for all the endless speculation and analysis and dreaming, the game remains a mystery, a thing glimpsed only in fragments, and that everything anyone believes about it is really just a reflection of their own hopes and fears cast onto a mostly blank screen. And there is something almost freeing in admitting that, in setting down the certainty and the anxiety alike, and simply accepting that the game will be whatever it will be, that it will arrive when it arrives, and that until then it is just a lovely and enormous unknown, floating out there in the near future, waiting, which leaves only the strangest question of all, the one that follows this game around like a shadow, the simple, nagging, unanswerable question of when, or even whether, all this waiting will finally end. The waiting itself has become almost its own subject, a meta-controversy, a running theory and worry about whether the announced date will truly hold, or whether there will be, somewhere down the line, yet another gentle delay, one more few months tacked onto a wait that has already stretched for years. The fanbase, burned twice, watches the calendar with a wary hope, half expecting to be disappointed again, and every rumour and every offhand comment from anyone connected to the company gets seized upon and analysed for signs. It is a strange way to relate to a piece of entertainment, this constant low-level vigilance, this bracing for a letdown, and it says a great deal about how the anticipation has come to dominate the experience, so that the game is felt most powerfully, not in the playing, but in the endless, anxious waiting to play. There are theories too about what happens after, about the long tail of support the game will surely receive, the years of updates and additions to its online world, and about the perennial and wistful question of whether the story itself might one day be expanded with new chapters. The company had in recent years moved away from adding new story content to its single-player games, pouring its energy instead into the endlessly profitable online worlds, and a devoted portion of the fan base mourns that shift and dreams that this game might reverse it, might bring back the tradition of rich single-player expansions, might give them more of the story they love rather than only more of the online grind. Whether that dream comes true, no one knows, and it hangs among the theories as a quiet, hopeful longing. Beneath all of it, the controversies and the theories alike, there is a simple and rather beautiful truth about why this one game has generated such an ocean of noise and speculation and feeling, which is that people love these worlds, deeply and genuinely, and have been waiting a very long time to return to them. All the arguments and the anxieties and the wild theories are, at bottom, expressions of that love, of a longing to be transported once more into one of these dense and living and gloriously chaotic worlds, of years of pent-up anticipation with nowhere yet to go. Strip away the noise, and what remains is just a great many people who cannot wait to play a game, and who have been made to wait anyway, and who fill the waiting with dreams. And there is something worth sitting with, gently, in the strangeness of caring so much about a thing that does not yet exist, in the way an unreleased game can generate real emotion, real community, real argument, and hope and disappointment, years before anyone can actually touch it. It is a very modern kind of longing, this anticipation of a thing perpetually just over the horizon, and it can be exhausting, all that waiting and wanting and watching, all that energy poured into a future that keeps receding. And so there is a real kindness you can do yourself on a night like this, which is to simply set it all down, to let the waiting go, to release the anticipation and the anxiety alike, and to remember that the game will come when it comes, and that until then, there is nothing at all you need to do about it. So there is nothing left to wait up for tonight, no trailer to refresh, no release date to count down to, no leak to chase across the internet in the dark. You have wandered through the whole long circus of it, every controversy and every wild theory, and it is time now to let all of it settle and go quiet and fade. When you step all the way back from it, the whole enormous saga of this game, the controversies and the theories, the hacks and the delays and the lawsuits and the endless dreaming, adds up to something rather remarkable and rather human, the portrait of the strange modern experience of collective anticipation. Never before have so many people spent so long waiting so intently for a single thing, pouring so much attention and emotion and creativity into something that does not yet exist. And the story of this game is really the story of all that longing, all that waiting, all that hope and worry and dreaming gathered around a bright empty space on the near horizon, and there is a lesson tucked into it, gentle and worth carrying with you into sleep, about the strange trap of living too much in anticipation, of pouring your present into the waiting for a future that keeps receding. The game will come, and it will be wonderful, or it will be flawed, or most likely, both, and either way the years of waiting will end, and life will go on much as before. There is a quiet wisdom in holding such anticipation lightly, in enjoying the dreaming without being consumed by it, in remembering that the thing itself, whenever it arrives, is only a game, a lovely and enormous game, but a game, and that your life is happening now, in the warm dark, in the breath and the quiet, and not in some perpetually delayed tomorrow. So let it all drift over you softly now, the way the noise of the internet finally goes quiet in the small hours, when the arguments have burned themselves out and the feeds have stopped refreshing, and even the most anticipated game in the world can wait until morning. The teenager and his hotel room hack, the trailer the whole world watched at once, the delays and the apologies and the endless waiting, the theories about the map and the two lovers on the run, all of it laid out gently in the dark for you to drift through, and now to leave behind. Let your breathing slow, let the room grow warm and safe around you. Somewhere out there the game is still being built, quietly, by people you will never meet, in a studio far away, and it will be there when it is there, and not a moment sooner, and none of it needs you to stay awake and wait for it. You do not have to refresh anything tonight. You do not have to keep watch. The most anticipated game in the world will keep itself until morning, and so will all its noise and all its drama, and so will you. You have wandered a long way tonight, through hacks and lawsuits and endless speculation, and you are allowed now to simply stop and rest. Good night, and sleep well.